You won't believe what happened to me. My own neighbor, the infamous HOA Karen, actually tried to stop me from parking on my own property. That's right, the lawn I pay taxes for. At first, I put up with it. But then came the fines, the threats, and the constant harassment. But when she said she'd have my truck towed, that's when I decided it was time to fight back. And my response wasn't ordinary. It was so big, the entire neighborhood stopped to watch. You won't believe this. My own neighbor, Karen, actually tried to ban me from parking in my own yard. That's right, my yard, the property I pay taxes for, the land I work hard to maintain, and the space I should have complete control over. Yet somehow, in Karen's mind, she thought she had the authority to tell me what I could and couldn't do on my own grass. Let me set the scene properly. I live in a suburban neighborhood that looks perfect on the surface. Wide streets, trimmed hedges, shiny cars and driveways, and houses that all look like they belong on some real estate magazine cover. And all of that perfection comes with strings attached. Those strings are called the Homeowners Association. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not against every single HOA rule. Some of them actually make sense. Keeping lawns neat? Sure, I don't want to live next to a jungle. Making sure trash bins aren't left out for days? Fine by me. Rules that stop people from painting their houses neon green? Okay, that's fair too. But the problem is never the rules themselves. It's the people who enforce them. Or in my case, one person in particular, Karen. Every neighborhood has a Karen. You know the type. The self-appointed sheriff, the self-righteous enforcer, the busybody who acts like your personal life is her business. And in our neighborhood, Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was the queen bee of the HOA. She lived 3 houses down from me, in a pristine white colonial house, with perfect shutters, flowers that looked like they were arranged by professionals, and a driveway so clean it could have doubled as a showroom floor. She wore big sun hats, oversized sunglasses, and walked around the neighborhood like she was running inspections. She was notorious. People whispered about her at block parties. Kids made jokes about her spying through curtains. But nobody really dared to cross her because she had the HOA board wrapped around her finger. She loved that power. To her, being in charge of the HOA wasn't a responsibility. It was a crown. Now I'm a simple guy. I work long hours. I come home tired. And all I want to do is relax. My driveway is small and narrow. And with more than one vehicle, sometimes it just makes more sense to park on the grass for a night or two. No harm done. The yard is mine. The grass is mine, and I'm the one paying for it. But in Karen's eyes, that was the ultimate crime. The first sign of trouble came one afternoon when I got home from work. I walked up to my porch and noticed something taped to my door. At first, I thought it was a flyer or maybe some junk mail. Nope. It was a bright orange violation notice. In bold, aggressive letters it said, "Parking on grass is strictly forbidden. Immediate fines apply." I actually laughed when I saw it. I mean, how ridiculous is that? It's not like I was running a used car lot on my lawn. It was just my truck, parked neatly, not blocking anyone, not spilling over onto the sidewalk. I crumpled up the notice, tossed it in the trash, and thought that would be the end of it. Oh, how wrong I was. Karen wasn't satisfied with sending me a single violation slip. No. This was just the beginning of what I liked to call her harassment campaign. First came the pictures. I noticed her lurking around with her phone, snapping shots of my truck, like she was some kind of paparazzi. And she wasn't discreet about it either. She'd stand right across the street, phone raised, snapping away while glaring at me. Next came the emails. Word got back to me that Karen was blasting the HOA board with photos of my truck, attaching dramatic captions like, "This is unacceptable. This homeowner is lowering the value of our entire community." As if my truck, parked on my grass, was going to tank the local housing market. Please. Then came the letters. Not just the official violation notices, but actual typed-up threats. She'd slipped them into my mailbox, bolding words like fines, tow, and legal action. Some of them were handwritten, full of underlined words and exclamation marks, like she was trying to make herself sound scarier. And then came the personal visits. Oh yes, Karen wasn't satisfied with just hiding behind her keyboard. She started marching up to my porch like she owned the place, wagging her finger in my face, lecturing me about how my careless behavior was destroying the community. I remember one evening, I had just come home from a 10-hour shift, still in my work boots, sweaty and exhausted, and there she was, waiting on my porch like some kind of HOA troll under a bridge. She launched into a 5-minute rant about how my grass would never recover from the weight of my tires. At that moment, I realized this wasn't just about a truck. This was about power. I tried being reasonable at first. I told her politely that my driveway was too small for both vehicles. I explained that the truck wasn't damaging anything. I even pointed out that technically, the HOA rules weren't clear about occasional yard parking. But logic doesn't work on people like Karen. Instead of backing off, she escalated. Within weeks, I started receiving official fines. The first was $100. Then another. Then another. Every single time my truck was in the yard, even for an hour, she documented it and reported it. Before long, I had a stack of fines totaling hundreds of dollars. And then came the threat that really crossed the line. One Saturday morning, I was outside washing my truck when Karen strutted over in her wide-brimmed hat, sunglasses reflecting the sunlight, arms crossed like she was about to deliver a royal decree. She looked me dead in the eye and said, in that smug, holier-than-thou tone, "From now on, if you park on that lawn, we'll tow your vehicle without warning." That was it. That was the moment. She wasn't just fining me anymore. She was threatening to take my property, from my own yard, on my own land. I stood there with a dripping sponge in my hand, staring at her, and something inside me snapped. Up until then, I'd been patient. I tried to ignore her. I tried reasoning with her. But now she was threatening me directly. And the funny thing about me is this. I don't like being pushed around. That night, I sat on my porch, staring out at the yard, replaying everything in my head. The notices, the letters, the fines, the finger-wagging lectures. And that's when a thought crossed my mind. If Karen wanted to make parking a battleground, then maybe it was time I brought in something bigger than a truck. Something she couldn't ignore. Something so over the top that it would end the fight once and for all. And that's when the idea of the tank was born. At first, I tried to be reasonable. I explained that my driveway was too narrow for both of my vehicles, and parking in the yard wasn't hurting anyone. But Karen wasn't hearing it. She insisted that I was bringing down the neighborhood's property values. I thought she was exaggerating. I mean, who really thinks a truck in a yard makes people stop buying homes? But Karen wasn't the type to let common sense get in the way of her crusade. Instead of a polite conversation, what came next felt like being pulled into a campaign against me. She rallied a few of her HOA buddies, the kind of people who love rules the way others love coffee. And suddenly I had more than one nosy neighbor to deal with. What began as an annoyance quickly turned into a daily grind. $100 fines every time my truck so much as kissed the grass. The fines were the wedge that drove everything into dirty territory. They started as a slap, then a steady drip. Each notice in my mailbox felt deliberate, like someone was counting on me to get tired, angry, or desperate. The board's emails always used the same clipped tone, like they were discussing a budget line item and not someone's actual life. Repeated violations will incur additional penalties. One read. Compliance is expected. Expected by whom? One Saturday morning felt like the moment the pressure valve finally blew. I was out in the driveway, hose in one hand, sponge in the other, the kind of domestic Saturday chore that's oddly therapeutic. The sun was high, soap suds shining on the hood of my truck, and for a few blissful minutes I forgot about HOA memos and angry neighbors. Then the sound of heels on concrete cut through the afternoon calm. Karen appeared like some kind of punishment. Oversized sun hat, sunglasses, the practiced scowl of someone permanently offended by the world. She planted herself at the edge of my porch with that dramatized posture she always struck. Hands on hips, chin up, the portrait of self-appointed morality. Her entrance was performative, like she'd rehearsed this exact moment. "From now on," she announced, shaping the words like she was reading them from a script she'd written herself. "If you park on that lawn, we'll tow your vehicle without warning." The sentence landed like a blow. It wasn't just a rule. It wasn't a neutral policy to be discussed. It was a threat. It was an attempt to remove something that belonged to me, from the very land I own. That was the line I wouldn't cross. I remember the sting of the words. For a second I felt smaller, exposed. Maybe. The way you do when someone tries to dictate how you live in your own house. It felt petty and theatrical and deeply invasive. She wasn't talking about neighborhood standards anymore. She was trying to police my everyday life. She was trying to control me. There are people who back down when confronted. I'm not one of them. Not because I'm brave all the time, far from it, but because I'm stubborn about my rights. I pay mortgage, I pay taxes, and I mow my lawn. I mow my lawn a lot, in fact. The idea that some self-appointed monitor could decide when or where I could park felt absurd. So I stood there, dripping sponge in hand, and looked her in the eye. After she left, triumphant like a judge announcing a sentence, I sat on my porch and let the afternoon stretch into evening. I replayed the scene in my head. The tone of her voice. The way she twirled her fingers when she was getting dramatic. The certainty that she was in the right. Her certainty was what bothered me most. When someone believes they're right and uses that belief to bully, it's dangerous. Power without accountability becomes cruelty disguised as order. That night I couldn't sleep. The idea of being bullied from my own driveway gnawed at me. I tried reason. She'd refused it. I tried compliance. That only encouraged her. Her threats hadn't stopped the truck from parking on the lawn. They just made the idea of living in my own home feel hostile. I started thinking about escalation. Not violence. Not anything illegal. Just ways to flip the script so that Karen would understand boundaries. If she wanted to escalate, maybe I should respond in a way that made the absurdity of her behavior obvious to the whole street. The goal wasn't to humiliate her. The goal was to end the harassment. You have to understand, this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment plan hatched over beers. It was the result of sleepless nights, replayed injustices, and imagineering the perfect response that would neither break laws nor hand her another victory. I wanted something bold, theatrical, indisputable. Something that would render her petty power plays ridiculous in front of the very people she thought she commanded. So I called my cousin. Jake is the kind of guy who loves big, loud projects. He restores old vehicles for fun, jeeps, military trucks, things that clank and wheeze and make people stare. He's an oddball, a craftsman, a walking headline. I told him what had happened. He laughed that low chuckle that means trouble in a suggestive, friendly way. Then he said, "You know what you need? Something she can't ignore." We traded ideas back and forth, like practical pranksters. The thought of something huge planted itself in my head and grew there like a weed. What if I brought something so absurd to my yard that no one could possibly take Karen's objections seriously anymore? A giant billboard? A statue? No, those ideas were tame. I wanted a visual so undeniable that the neighbors would talk about it for weeks. Something that would tilt the power back where it belonged. Jake's hobby collection included things most people only see in movies. Among the relics and rusted engines, there was a piece of history he'd been restoring for years. A decommissioned, fully demilitarized tank. It was inert as a lawn ornament, but authentic enough to make a point. He'd shown me pictures before. I joked about parking it in front of my house on a whim. At the time it was comic fantasy. But now, after the son had confrontation, it felt like an answer. The idea itself was part protest, part performance art. I wasn't trying to threaten anyone. I wasn't trying to terrorize. I just wanted the community to see how ridiculous a petty enforcement campaign could look when held up against something outrageous and harmless. So we sat down and made a plan. Not to antagonize, but to defuse. If Karen wanted control through fear and fines, I'd replace fear with absurdity. If she sought to shame me, I'd force the neighborhood to witness her overreach. Execution had to be smart. We checked the legalities. We made sure the tank had been fully decommissioned, stripped of anything that could be considered a weapon, and that the whole thing complied with city ordinances. We agreed on timing, a Saturday morning when the street would be awake and eyes would be watching. Jake arranged transport, a flatbed, and the quiet sort of logistical miracle that happens when someone who loves complicated projects decides to help a cousin out. When the day arrived, I had a sense of both nervousness and relief. This was not about petty vengeance. This was about reclaiming normal life. As the flatbed rolled up the street and people started to peer out their windows. I felt oddly theatrical. I felt like someone flipping the stage lights on in the middle of a bad play. I felt like the absurdity was about to become visible to everyone, and that maybe, finally, the neighborhood would see what I'd been dealing with. I knew there were risks. Public opinion can swing both ways. But the worst-case scenario was Karen doubling down, and she'd already proved she would. The better outcome was people laughing, talking, maybe even checking the fine print on HOA rules, and realizing that the real problem wasn't a truck on a yard. It was someone who couldn't handle other people living their lives. Whatever happened next, the night had already changed me. I wasn't going to be shuffled into silence. Not over a truck. Not in my own yard. The sun had pushed me too far, and the rest, as they say, was about to get interesting. Now, here's where the story takes a wild turn. You see, most people would just file a complaint, argue with the HOA board, or maybe even lawyer up. But I'm not most people. I believe in making a point in a way that nobody can forget. And thanks to family connections, I had the perfect way to make that point. My cousin, let's call him Dave, has this insane hobby. While other people collect stamps or build model trains, Dave restores old military vehicles. Tanks, jeeps, half-tracks, you name it. He either has it, or knows someone who does. His shop is basically a living museum of steel monsters. One Thanksgiving years ago, he casually mentioned over dinner that he had access to an authentic tank. At the time, I laughed and thought, that's cool trivia. But now, that little piece of information felt like destiny. The more Karen pushed me, the more the idea grew in my head. It started as a joke. What if I parked a tank in my yard? But soon turned into a plan. It was the perfect combination of hilarious, ridiculous, and impossible to ignore. If Karen wanted to pick a fight over what I parked on my property, then I was going to bring in the biggest, baddest vehicle I could find. So I called Dave. At first, he thought I was joking. Wait, you want to park a tank in your yard? Like to prove a point? He asked between bursts of laughter. Exactly, I replied. If Karen's mad about my truck, let's see how she handles 30 tons of rolling steel. There was silence, then a chuckle, and finally Dave said the magic words. You know what? I'm in. Over the next few days, we worked out the logistics. This wasn't like towing a car. It required a flatbed trailer, permits, and some careful planning. But Dave lived for this kind of thing. To him, it was just another Saturday project. To me, it was going to be the neighborhood spectacle of the century. That Friday night, I could barely sleep. I kept imagining Karen's face when she looked out her window and saw a tank pointed at her house. Would she faint? Would she call the cops? Would her sun hat actually fly off in cartoon fashion? Whatever the outcome, I knew one thing for sure. It was going to be unforgettable. And then came the big day. Late Saturday morning, while most of the neighborhood was out mowing lawns or sipping coffee, a low rumble echoed down the street. At first, people thought it was thunder, but as it grew louder, heads turned, garage doors creaked open, and neighbors wandered onto porches. Then, over the hill, it appeared, a massive flatbed truck hauling something covered in a heavy tarp. The driver slowed as he turned onto our street, and people leaned closer, squinting in curiosity. The closer it came, the clearer the silhouette became. The shape was unmistakable, broad, squat, and heavy. Someone gasped, "No way, is that a tank?" Kids were the first to react. They dropped their bikes and scooters, running alongside the flatbed like it was a parade. Phones came out, recording every second. Even the mailman, who was halfway through his route, stopped in his tracks, pulled out his phone, and started filming. As the flatbed pulled up in front of my house, the driver hopped out, gave me a nod, and said, "Where do you want it?" "Right on the grass," I replied with the biggest grin of my life. The tarp was pulled back, and there it was, 30 tons of cold, glorious steel. The sun gleamed off its armored body. The turret looked intimidating even without ammunition. To me, it wasn't just a machine. It was a message carved in iron. This is my yard, and I'll park what I want on it. The driver carefully lowered the tank down the ramps. The ground shook as the tracks touched my lawn. The engine roared to life, and with a deep, thunderous rumble, the beast rolled forward. My whole house vibrated with each movement. Grass flattened instantly under its weight, but I didn't care. If Karen wanted to complain about property values, let her complain about property values while staring at a tank. I guided the driver, and together we positioned the tank perfectly, dead center of my yard, angled just so that the barrel of the turret was pointed directly at Karen's front porch. It wasn't dangerous, of course. No live rounds, no weapon systems. But the visual alone was enough to make a statement louder than any words could. The moment it settled into place, silence fell over the street. For a heartbeat, nobody said anything. People just stared wide-eyed, mouths hanging open. Then, like the crack of fireworks, cheers erupted. The kids went wild, neighbors clapped, and someone even shouted, "This is the greatest thing I've ever seen." Even the usually grumpy old man 2 doors down, who never talks to anyone, muttered, "Well, that's one way to handle an HOA." Meanwhile, I leaned against the tank, arms crossed, and just soaked it in. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from pure satisfaction. I had just pulled off the most absurd, over-the-top move of my life, and it felt incredible. And then came the moment I had been waiting for, Karen's reaction. Her blinds snapped open. A pale face peeked out. Her jaw dropped so low I thought it might hit the windowsill. Within seconds, her front door flew open, and out she stormed, sun hat, sunglasses, and all, like she was marching into battle. She stomped across her driveway, heels clicking, finger wagging furiously. "What is this?" she screeched. "You can't just, this is outrageous. You can't park a military vehicle on your lawn." I stayed calm, leaning casually against the tank's massive tread. "Actually, Karen, there's nothing in the HOA rules about tanks. Just says, no parking on the grass." Her face turned redder than a stop sign. "This is intimidation. This is harassment. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," I shrugged. "Pretty sure they'll want a selfie with it before they leave." That line sent the kids into hysterics. Even a couple of my neighbors doubled over laughing. Karen, on the other hand, was fuming so hard I thought steam might come out of her ears. She stormed back into her house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. But by then, the damage was done. The whole neighborhood had seen it. The story would spread like wildfire. And let me tell you, nothing felt better than standing in my yard with a 30-ton tank behind me, while Karen's reign of petty terror crumbled in real time. For the rest of the weekend, my yard became the hottest tourist spot in the subdivision. Families stopped by to take pictures. Teenagers posed for Instagram selfies. Even strangers from nearby streets walked over to see the infamous HOA tank incident. It was like a block party built around one giant, glorious middle finger to the HOA queen herself. And me. I just sat on my porch with a glass of sweet tea, watching it all unfold, grinning ear to ear. I didn't have to wait long for Karen's reaction. The second the tank's tread settled into my lawn, her front door slammed open like a cannon blast. Out she stormed, phone in one hand, sun hat clutched in the other, face twisted in disbelief. She looked like a general marching into battle, except instead of leading an army, she was wielding her cell phone and a shriek loud enough to wake the entire block. "This is outrageous," she screamed at the top of her lungs. "I'm calling the police. I'm reporting you to the federal government. You can't just park a tank in your yard." Her voice carried down the street, echoing like a siren. Windows opened, blinds snapped up, and within minutes, what started as curious glances had turned into a full-blown neighborhood audience. And let me tell you, the neighbors were loving it. A couple across the street dragged out folding lawn chairs like they were settling in for a fireworks show. The dad set up a cooler while his kids held up signs made from cardboard reading, "Tank 1, Karen 0. Down the block, teenagers gathered in a little group, phones up, filming every second for TikTok. You could hear the giggles and commentary. "This is going viral, dude. No way this isn't viral." One of the older neighbors, Mr. Johnson, who rarely even waves at people, actually wheeled his recliner onto his driveway just to watch. He had a cigar in one hand and a grin on his face. For a man who never got involved in drama, that smile said it all. This was better than TV. And then came the line that tipped the whole crowd into hysteria. One guy from the corner, who had been watching silently until then, cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Hey, Karen, at least the grass won't grow under those tank treads." For a split second, the world went quiet, like everyone was holding their breath. Then it exploded. Laughter erupted from every yard, every driveway, every porch. People doubled over, clutching their stomachs. Someone even spit out their soda from laughing so hard. Kids rolled on the ground, repeating the line to each other. "No grass under the tank. No grass under the tank." It became an instant neighborhood catchphrase. Everyone was laughing, everyone except Karen. She stood there frozen, trembling with rage, her knuckles white around her phone. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but she couldn't find words louder than the wave of laughter crashing over her. Finally, she screeched, "You people don't understand. This is a violation. This is dangerous. He's putting all of us at risk." Her rant was cut short by the distant wail of sirens. Heads turned. Some neighbors gasped dramatically. Others whispered with excitement. Karen puffed up with smug satisfaction, announcing to anyone who would listen, "See, the police are coming. You're finished." But I wasn't worried. Not even a little. The sirens grew louder until 2 patrol cars rolled slowly down the street. They didn't come speeding in like it was an emergency. They pulled up casually, like the officers already knew this was going to be something unusual. As they parked and stepped out, the crowd practically buzzed with anticipation. Phones were raised higher. Every neighbor leaned forward to catch the reaction. The first officer, a tall guy with sunglasses, stopped dead in his tracks the moment he saw the tank. His jaw dropped, and he let out a low whistle. The second officer actually started laughing before he even reached my driveway. He slapped his partner on the shoulder and muttered, "You don't see this every day." Karen bolted toward them like a lawyer, making her opening statement. She waved her arms frantically, pointing at me, then at the tank, then at the grass. "Officers! Officers! Arrest him! This is illegal. He's endangering the neighborhood with a military weapon. Do your jobs." The officers exchanged a look. One of them had to bite his lip to keep from laughing outright. "Ma'am," the taller officer said carefully, "what exactly is the crime here?" "It's a tank," she screamed, jabbing her finger at it. "He's threatening me. Look at it. It's pointed right at my house." The officer turned to me, and I stayed cool as ice, arms folded, leaning casually against the tank's tread like it was a backyard barbecue prop. "Sir," the officer said, struggling to keep a straight face, "is this vehicle yours?" "Yes, officer," I replied calmly. "It's fully demilitarized, no ammunition, no weapons. It's perfectly safe. My cousin restores military vehicles as a hobby. This one's been legally purchased, and today it's parked on my private property." The officer nodded slowly, clearly impressed. He walked around the tank, running his hand along the steel, like a car enthusiast admiring a classic ride. The other officer pulled out his phone and snapped a quick picture when he thought nobody was looking. Karen was livid. "What are you doing? He's breaking the law. You're supposed to fine him. Arrest him. Do something." The tall officer finally chuckled, shaking his head. "Ma'am, I'm afraid there's nothing illegal about this. It's private property. He's not breaking any laws. If you have an HOA issue, that's a civil matter, not a police matter." Those words hit Karen like a sledgehammer. Her face turned beet red, her mouth quivered, and for the first time since I'd known her, she was completely speechless. The crowd loved it. Applause broke out, people cheered, and someone shouted, "Case closed." The officers gave me a nod, hopped back into their cars, and drove off, leaving Karen standing in the middle of the street, humiliated and powerless. That was the moment I knew the tide had turned. Karen's threats, her endless stream of violation notices, her constant nagging, it all evaporated in the laughter and cheers of the neighborhood. She wasn't the queen bee anymore. She was just a neighbor who got outsmarted by a guy with a tank. I glanced around at the smiling faces, the phone still recording, the kids chanting tank, 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 and I felt something shift. For the first time since moving in, the neighborhood felt united against her. And for once, I wasn't the outsider being targeted. I was the guy who stood up to the bully, and everyone respected it. Karen stomped back into her house, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. But it didn't matter anymore. She could huff and puff all she wanted. The battle was over, and she'd lost badly. Standing there with the tank behind me, the cheers of my neighbors around me, and the image of Karen's defeat burned into my mind, I couldn't help but smile. My yard. My rules. End of story. The tank stayed in my yard for about a week, and honestly, that week was one of the most surreal, entertaining times of my life. Every single day was like hosting an unplanned block party. The second people realized the tank wasn't just a one-day stunt, word spread like wildfire. By Monday, I had cars from other streets slowly cruising by just to get a glimpse. Parents would stop, roll down their windows, and let their kids snap pictures. By Tuesday, people were parking just to come up and ask questions. Is it real? Can we touch it? Can we take a picture standing on top? Of course, I didn't let anyone climb it. Dave would have killed me if the tank got scratched, but I did let kids stand in front of it for pictures. And I'll admit, I let a few of the veterans in the neighborhood touch the steel. You should have seen their faces. One older gentleman, a retired Army sergeant, stood there in silence for a long time, then saluted it. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "Son, I never thought I'd see one of these again." That moment hit me harder than I expected. What started as a joke had become something deeper for some of people around me. Neighbors who had barely spoken to me before suddenly treated me like a local hero. Mr. Johnson, the quiet, grumpy guy with the recliner, actually stopped by my porch one evening and said, "I don't usually get into other people's business, but I gotta admit, that was one of the best things I've ever seen in this neighborhood." Then he handed me a six-pack of beer as if to say, "Good work, kid." And the kids? Oh, they absolutely lost their minds. They'd show up on bikes, scooters, and skateboards, circling my lawn like it was a playground attraction. One kid even drew a crayon picture of the tank with me standing next to it, handing it to me like I was some kind of celebrity. His mom laughed and said, "You're the cool neighbor now. Thanks for giving them something to talk about other than video games." But the biggest change of all? Karen. For the first time since I'd moved in, she was silent. Completely silent. No more violation notices slapped on my door. No angry emails to the HOA board. No daily finger-wagging speeches on my porch. It was as if she had evaporated into thin air. At first, I thought it was temporary. I half expected her to storm over again, demanding the war machine be removed, maybe even bringing some HOA paperwork to back her up. But days passed and nothing happened. Her blinds stayed shut. Her car barely moved. When she did step outside, usually late at night, she scurried to her mailbox and darted back inside like a raccoon avoiding headlights. It was almost unsettling how quiet she had become. This was the woman who used to treat every loose trash bin or slightly crooked mailbox as a federal offense. And now, nothing. Not a peep. But the silence wasn't just her hiding, it was her defeat. Everyone in the neighborhood could feel it. The queen bee of the HOA had lost her sting. Eventually, the week came to an end, and it was time to send the tank back to my cousin. As the flatbed truck hauled it away, I'll admit, I felt a little sad. The yard looked emptier, without that hunk of steel sitting proudly in the grass. But the impact it left behind? That stuck around. Even now, months later, people still bring it up at block parties and cookouts. Somebody will crack open a beer and say, "Remember the tank?" And suddenly the whole group bursts into laughter, retelling the story from their perspective. One guy says, "Man, when the police showed up, I thought you were done for, but then they started laughing too." Another neighbor jokes, "We should rent that tank every 4th of July and make it a tradition." It became a neighborhood legend, the kind of story new families hear about when they move in. Oh, you didn't hear? A guy once parked a tank in his yard to shut down the HOA. And when they point at my house, I just smile and sip my drink. But the best part? The practical results. From that week forward, I've had the freedom to park my truck wherever I want, driveway, yard, even halfway onto the grass if I feel like it. Karen never said another word about it. Not a whisper, not a note, not a single thread. My truck sits proudly on my lawn whenever I need it to, and the only thing I hear from neighbors now is, "Hey man, love your truck." Word on the street is that Karen actually resigned from the HOA board not long after. Some say it was because she needed a break for her mental health. Others whisper that the board grew tired of her constant crusades and quietly pushed her out. Whatever the truth was, the timing was suspiciously perfect. And honestly, I didn't miss her leadership one bit. The neighborhood actually felt lighter, more relaxed. People weren't as tense about minor infractions anymore. It was as if my ridiculous stunt reminded everyone what really mattered: community, not control. Looking back, I realized the tank wasn't just about proving a point to Karen. It was about standing up to unnecessary control, about reminding people that homeowners actually own their homes. Sure, the HOA has its place, but there's a line between order and obsession. Karen had crossed that line a long time ago, and it took a little creativity and 30 tons of steel to put her back in her place. Sometimes, words don't get through to people like Karen. Threats, fines, and power trips are all they understand. So the only way to break the cycle is with action. And in my case, that action just happened to involve a 50-ton tank. Do I recommend everyone handle their HOA troubles this way? Probably not. But will I ever regret it? Not in a million years. Because here's the truth. For one glorious week, I didn't just park in my yard. I parked history in my yard. And I reminded everyone, including Karen, that I wasn't someone to be pushed around. And even now, months later, when I see my truck sitting comfortably on the grass, I can't help but smirk. Because that patch of lawn isn't just a parking spot anymore. It's a battlefield I won. In the end, one bold move changed everything. Karen, who used to scream and threaten me every single day, suddenly went completely silent. No more notices, no more yelling, no more fines. The whole neighborhood stood with me. And even months later, people still laugh about what I did. And the best part? Now I can park my truck on my lawn anytime I want, without a single word from Karen. Sometimes in life, actions speak louder than words, and my action just happened to be a 50-ton tank. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more wild neighborhood tales. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, remember, the best way to handle a Karen is to outsmart them in style.